Sounds great.
Hi, this is the Cancer Patient Lab. I'm Brad Power, co-founder, and we're pleased today to have Kevin Freiert of Salem Oaks to talk with us. I ran into Kevin at a recent conference here in Boston where he was attending. He focuses on rare diseases. It was a rare disease, rare cancer conference. And we've known each other for several years. I got to know Kevin as someone who'd come out of Pfizer and knows the clinical trials process and through a set of circumstances got into the business of helping patients understand how the clinical trials process works. And when he told me that the challenge he's facing is he could develop 50 different modules of education materials for patients, but doesn't know where to prioritize, where to start, I said, well, our community, I sometimes call our community focus group as a service. That we are a ready-made market research forum that can give feedback to startups, as we've done many times, or to someone like Kevin, who's got these kinds of questions. I'll put mute. So that's the intro to Kevin. I'll turn it over to him in a minute. Just our two standard disclaimers. One, this is for information purposes only. It is not medical advice. Consult your doctor. We're trying to help arm patients with information they can bring to their doctors and their medical teams. And the second is everything you say can and will be used against you, that everything we do here is public. And so if you are concerned about anything being made public, your image or what you say, you can certainly not turn on your camera. You can disguise your name. And if you don't say anything, we won't know you were there. You can just be fly on the wall. The final note is that the Cancer Patient Lab is a nonprofit, and we depend on the kindness of people who make donations of time and money. And so this is just a reminder that we would appreciate any donations that people can make. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin. The screen share should work, and he will tell us about Salem Oaks, his background, and some of the questions that he's wrestling with.
So thank you, Brad, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today to you guys. Brad mentioned it to me that you were a group of people who knows what's going on. It was clear just from hearing Sherry's introduction there. The end of it, I heard you're really tuned into your healthcare and your cancer and the treatments you're going through. I myself am a recovered rare cancer patient. I had a liposarcoma that was removed in 1998. So that seems like a long time ago. The only liposarcoma patients I've talked to since then, and were in much worse case than, or much worse situation than I was. And I haven't been able to follow up with them. I think they were primarily terminal. I did spend 30 years at Pfizer, and a lot of that time was spent teaching people how drug discovery and development works. So my scope is larger than clinical trials. My thing at Pfizer was I knew how the whole puzzle fit together, and I helped people understand how they depended on each other to get things done. When I left Pfizer, I started Salem Oaks, as Brad said, to teach patients how pharmaceutical R&D really works so that they can have a greater impact as they approach companies, or they approach academic researchers, or they approach the FDA. It's a lot easier to win the game if you know how the game is played. And so that's what I set out to do. And what I'm going to do today is I'm trying to get some feedback from you and also offer to you a service that we've put together. I want to give you a little bit of background on it. We call it the Atlas. Let me just share here to get us going. Let me just move things out of my own way so I can both see you and see things. So the Atlas, or the long name, the Biopharmaceutical Atlas of Discovery and Development, is a subscription service where we're offering courses, and I'll go into this in a little more detail. We're offering courses to people at the pace that they need it. And maybe I should just dive in and ask you guys some questions first, so I'm not stepping over myself on things. So the first question I have for you is, just in general, how well do you guys already understand drug development, drug discovery and development? For example, how many of you have been in clinical trials? If you just want to use the raise hand, that would be cool, or the vote. That's not working too great for me, so maybe I do need you to speak on it. And have any of you met with the FDA or any other regulatory authorities talking about, your situation, your diagnosis, or the treatments available?
Not me.
I haven't either.
How about meeting with academic researchers? Anybody try to get people starting to look at treatments that may not exist yet?
Yes.
So
Or
I've
that
got
are early, that they're early in the pipeline, right?
yeah, they're very early in the pipeline then.
Yeah.
So, and then a different question is, do any of you invest in the biopharmaceutical market?
No.
I'll just offer that I'm currently part of an FDA expanded access application. So it's not a clinical trial, but it is a clinical research study. I'm getting a vaccine under that program.
Well, that's actually good to know. That knowing what an expanded access is kind of a level of, oh, okay, we know what the difference is between a study and a trial. So let me ask another, where do you learn about this, or where have you learned about drug discovery and development before? Where do you get your information? And please just unmute and speak up if you have an answer.
This is Cheryl. I get most of my information from this, and then other organizations. My brother has prostate cancer and our father died of it. I've had breast cancer and I'm being watched for multiple myeloma. So I sign up for information from those sites, but that's about it.
At Cancer Patient Lab, we use Massive Bio, which is a free service, which if you give them access, if you consent to get them access to your medical records, they will tell you about clinical trials. So they look at clinicaltrials.gov and they give you the ones, you define a geography that you're willing to travel, and then they give you the best clinical trials for you. We get similar services from Cancer Commons. If you, similarly, you release your medical records and they come back and tell you about either standard treatments or clinical trials. So that's the way I, and I think many others, have gotten information about what's available in clinical trials.
That's great to know.
And I'm more of an end user. I just took the recommendations of my medical oncologist and discussed things with her.
Fantastic. And David, have you been in a trial?
Yes, I'm currently enrolled in the Charted 2 trial, and that's due to conclude, I'm told, later this year.
Great. I hope it's going well for you. So one more question before I start dumping my brain at you guys. How important do you think it is for patients and caregivers to understand where drugs come from? And why do you think that's important? I'd really like to hear comments from a number of you here.
I'll go. I think it's important because in many ways, if you join a clinical drug trial, it's a leap of faith. And it would be nice to know what a little more information so it's not quite as big a leap. You see so many, first in human studies. Well, okay, what came before that they're able to get at least out of the mouse or whatever model to humans?
Excellent. Any other thoughts?
This isn't really a comment regarding this particular question, but it's a kind of an overall comment, which is that for a lot of our patients, they're doing a lot of advanced diagnostics, and they're trying to redefine their disease using those diagnostics. And when you redefine your disease, it can open up drugs that may not be approved or used in your particular cancer setting, but they may work very well in other cancer settings. So really, and if you have, for example, the gene expression, the gene makeup alterations, etc., that looks like patients that might receiving a drug in a different cancer setting, then why not pursue those other drugs? And that's a challenge that I think that we have, is how do we fast track drugs using genomics rather than just using cancer setting?
Wow, that's a really deep question. That'll be one of the upcoming courses I put together. And it really is, it touches on a number of things. It's off-label use, the prevalent off-label use of drugs in oncology, more so than in other areas. And so it kind of gets into some of the subtleties, particularly in the oncology world. So let me talk a little bit about how we got to what we're at today. We've tried to put together education for people, all the goodwill in the world. I've got a career's worth of stuff in my brain. I've got experts I can tap into to build things that I don't know as well. As I said, I know how to put the puzzle together, but I need to talk to the puzzle pieces to go deeper where needed. And we tried to just build things, kind of put them out there retail and see if people would come. And no one did. There's no reason for someone to come find us. We started working with some of the organizations, and Brad mentioned I work in rare disease. That's more of a tendency than sort of a boundary that we have. I've fallen in love with the rare disease community, and I also serve on the board of Rare New England as part of that. And rare diseases kind of upset the apple cart of drug development. So it's an interesting place to go because there's a lot of breakthroughs there. But we started working with rare disease organizations and putting together projects for them, and that works pretty well. However, they have to go find funding. And the funding they can get doesn't actually compensate us for the amount of time we're putting into it and the value of the knowledge that's there. They're not where the funds really accumulate. It works well, and we always will work with an organization if they have a project we want to do. But what we noticed is there's a problem here. The problem is that we've got people who are really specialized and understand this very well. And I've always saw this, even when I was at Pfizer, there were people who were experts in tiny little things who didn't know how they fit in the big picture, but they really knew their stuff. And then you've got your average Joe out there, and I'm trying to talk to this person, and it's a big gap. And the knowledge gap is bigger. It's variable, but it's bigger than I had originally anticipated. The second problem is everybody jumps in, and as Brian said, you want to fast track things. You want to go faster. Everybody wants that world-class discovery and development. But actually, they're newer to the game. They probably just got thrown into this because of a diagnosis. And it's a really long road. You hear the statistics, 12 to 15 years to find a drug. Well, what does that mean? And everybody who's doing this is starting at a different place, and they have different skills. They've got different life experience, and they're in different situations. And so it was really hard for us to say, here's what we need to do for somebody. And the third thing is drug discovery and development, just clinical trials, actually, it's just too much to eat at once. And what you get is people who come in and just give you the very superficial, and don't go deep where you need it, or they go so deep and they try to put it all into one 45-minute session, and you just can't swallow it quickly. And therefore, you're not learning. It kind of bounces off of you. So as we looked at these three problems, we said, well, if you've got individual pathways and people have knowledge gaps, why don't we actually ask them what they need to know next? Is there a way to talk to people, much like I just did with you, to figure out where you're at first, and then build to order what you need? People who are very early in the process need things that are different than people who are trying to get a investigational drug through the FDA that's been, that started its journey 10 years before they started theirs. This excess here of the knowledge gap and too much information, well, we're going to start building bite-sized things. I was getting very good at building these big, long courses that no one would ever do. They're just too long. We don't have that much time to devote at once. So we're doing bite-sized chunks. And then this individual pathways and too much information, we wanted to make this self-paced and flexible. So it's less about when I can show up and more about when people can show up and dive into what they're doing. And so with this sort of framework in mind, we started with a blank sheet of paper. Oh, well, this came up sooner than I thought. So what we came up with is a subscription model where we're going to put out at least 30 minutes of online learning. We usually do a bit more than that each month. And people can, come in and use those each month as they go through. And they also have the opportunity to let us know, what they need. And if there's somebody who's doing something, one of my expert friends or something, it's a place for them to show off what they do. We provide written resources. So I've just done a couple courses on some regulatory guidances that have come out, but we provide the guidances. You shouldn't have to go digging through fda.gov to find something because it's actually really hard. You have to learn how they've organized their information base, and it's not always obvious. And then other references, and we've got recommendations for books and things that we've read along the way, or people that we know have authored. We have a discussion board. We went kind of old school here. We wanted people to start conversations and be able to track with those conversations. Oh, and by the way, create a lasting record of those discussions. That way people can go in and they might be able to search for something and find the other people in the community who have used it or who have had experience with it. And then we offer biweekly office hours. This is basically time when, we're available to answer questions, whether it's about the learnings that were out there or just anything else. It's almost a complimentary consulting time for those who show up for it. And when we started to say, well, what are we going to put into this? What's the content? This is where we started with a blank sheet of paper. And I often see people put a timeline out there and say, and this is the process. The problem with that is it's very linear and doesn't capture the complexity and the interdependency of things. And it doesn't actually tell you about the outcomes. It tells you about the timing of things. And so every time I put this picture up, I warn people that may make your head hurt. But this is what's in my brain of how I kind of think about this whole process. And what you see here is a number of major arms of the work that's going on that needs to happen. And this is taking you from, gee, I have an idea for something all the way through to an approved treatment. And each of these little nodes is a course that I could build. And I know I need to build them at sort of a basic, intermediate, and advanced level. So if I add all these things up, there's about 400 courses that I could build. And it takes me about a week to do each one. And so it's going to take me years to get there, which is where we come back to, well, what do people need next? And this is, basically the framework that we're building. These are the types of things that, get learned through the process. And then we go and we have a conversation and ask people Where are you now? Where are you in the process? So I forget who mentioned they're in an expanded access. You know, that's not even on here. It's kind of like beyond the the drug discovery and development process, but it's a big part of it. And so we will be working on courses about that as well. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions or reactions. I can show you some of what we have, but probably I want to get the idea of the concept wrapped up a little bit first.
So is this germane to a particular type of cancer, or is this generic enough that it can be used for a variety of cancers?
It's not even limited to cancer.
Okay, can you
this is-
elaborate on that?
So people have other diseases, and there are people looking for drugs for those diseases. And so that's where I work in the rare disease space. You know, I work with the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. They're looking for drugs for Friedreich's Ataxia, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but even things like less rare diseases, but things like multiple sclerosis. There's a lot of work going on trying to find drugs. I'm not bringing disease knowledge. I'm bringing, here's the process. No matter what disease you're looking at, you're going to have to follow in some way, shape, or form. I already mentioned oncology is slightly different than, if you're looking at an anti-infective or something for headaches. There's a slightly different process that's taken, but the basic bones are the same. You still have to show that it's safe, it's effective, that you can make it consistently, purely, and to the strengths and qualities that you say you're making it. And it all is regulated. So you've got to deal with the FDA and all of that. So good question, though. And Robert, you had a question?
Yeah, and it really, it's not really related to what you've been talking about, but you'd be a good person to ask since you know the field. So I'm 5 weeks into a clinical trial, and within the first week, the drug that I am taking was bought out by Novartis. How common is a big company buying out a drug that's in phase 2 or whatever phase? And is there cause for concern that, going from a small biotech to this big giant company,
So there's lots of details behind that I don't know, but to answer your question, yes, this is very common. In fact, when I started in the industry, we did everything. We did some of the basic research. We looked for drugs. We selected those drugs. We moved them forward. We got them into clinical trials and went all the way through the whole process. Now the industry works more where the biotechs do that early stage work and get it to a point where it's an attractive investment for the bigger companies, who then have the wherewithal to take them over the goal line. Because the small biotechs usually don't have all of the regulatory horsepower, the manufacturing horsepower, the experience, and the processes to make this happen. It's actually been a real boon for the whole system, because the biotechs can work really quickly in that early stage, which fails a remarkably high percentage of the time. So they can churn very quickly. And then once things become promising and a company buys it up, that seems like that company has expressed some interest. The things you may notice are less of a personal touch. I don't know how close the biotech was to you, but it's a big company. It's got lots of things going on. And things may get more systematic. like things that were like, it felt like they were falling through the cracks and stuff will stop. Because the big company knows if we don't tighten the ship and we don't do this well, then we're never going to get that approval. And if we don't get that approval, we've just wasted our investment. So that's one view of it. The other thing, I don't know how big the small company was, how many assets that were taken up in the acquisition, or if it was just one.
Just one.
If it was many, then you're kind of at the, well, gee, which one did they really buy the company for?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just one. It happens to be the drug that I'm on.
I'd say that's a promising sign.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good sign. Anybody else have any questions?
Nobody has their hand raised.
I do. So
who's
I am in between. My last treatment is no longer working. My tumors are growing. I had a Zoom consultation with my clinical trial oncologist 2 weeks ago. She said the approval for Insight was going to be funded any day. I know my tumors are growing. My concern is, how do I know how serious this is? This going to happen in the next few weeks? Or do I go back to my oncologist and say, let's go for something different? I want to be proactive with my care, but I don't want to nudge too much and drive them crazy. But knowledge is power for me. And so that's my question.
So this is where Brad's disclaimer about medical advice. I have no qualifications to give you any medical advice, so I can't even do it.
Okay.
My advocacy advice would be, don't worry about the nudging.
Okay.
You're dealing with
Okay.
your life and your body here.
Yes, exactly.
So
Okay.
go to your oncologist. The place where you can find things would be clinicaltrials.gov.
Okay, and I've been there.
And so look for what's there. But the question I think you ask your oncologist is something like, what are my other options?
Okay. Okay. Very good.
And why wouldn't you have recommended that in the first place? Kind of dig a little.
Okay.
And there's a friend of mine, Rob Wecker, you guys may know him. He like pushed back on his oncologist who said, well, we can't give you that because it's just too hard a dosing. And he's like, I work in the pharmaceutical industry in the dosing world. What don't you think I can do?
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
and it was,
Okay.
so sometimes people make assumptions about your ability to do a treatment.
Okay.
Don't let that happen. You know, just
Okay.
keep digging. What's the objection? Can we manage it?
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think just as a rule of thumb, Sherry, it's always good to have parallel paths, because there's so many reasons why a drug or combinatorial that you are pursuing may not actually happen. It may be that you can't get access to it, or you're not going to get insurance reimbursement. There's a lot of different things. You need to have, multiple irons in the fire to be able to navigate this. Yep. Okay, David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a continuation of that point, I think, is that when a clinical trial was first suggested to me, one of my first questions for my oncologist was, does this limit me in my potential treatments? Am I locked into this? What are the consequences if I drop from the trial or do something different? Am I prevented from pursuing other courses? And I was very relieved, at least in my case, to learn that no, I wasn't locked into anything, so I could change. But one of the questions that came up from a friend of mine with colon cancer was the qualifications needed for the trial that she was interested in. In her case, she found out about a new trial about 3 days before she was due to start a chemo session that would have disqualified her. So knowing what the prerequisites are can change your decision tree, and that's worth knowing in advance.
I think that's really important. It's the eligibility criteria. So the inclusions and exclusions in a study are because you're trying to control an experiment, and there are things which would disqualify you, or as David asked, would this disqualify me from something in the future? There's it's hard though, because you're trying to anticipate something you're trying to anticipate. It's like, how am I supposed to know what the eligibility criteria are if I don't know what the trial is that I'm looking for? But it is important. And again, that's a place where you can push back a little. You may not get the immediate answer you want, but I know that companies, when they start hearing, gee, people aren't enrolling in this trial because they're not meeting criteria over and over and over again, they go back and look at their criteria and say, do we really need that? Can we be flexible? So it's important to make your voice known if you're seeing something like that. Great questions. So anything else that someone has before I attempt to do a mini demo type here? I don't see any, and I don't see any in the chat either. So,
No,
so the Atlas is just on our website, Salem Oaks. We offer exclusive courses for members. And we've also got some free courses that will be put out there, but it's up to us. What goes out is free. And then we've got a way to pay for it, course by course. Some people may not want to jump into our subscription program, but the subscription program actually, I think, for the value you get is fairly good bargain. It's worth the money. So it's $75 a month, or if you pay in 6-month increments, it's $300. So somewhere between $300 and $900 a year. And I'm telling you those details is, I'm not a pitch man. I'm not good at this. But what I'm trying to get is some feedback from you guys as well. What we have in our course catalog, which people can always see, I've got something in my way here. Right now, you can see, I think I've got 15 courses that I've built so far. These are the various topic areas, those bars that you saw in that tree I showed before, and then the courses that are built in there. So how do you make your original case for research? What is the Atlas? How does this work? And then what is basic drug discovery and development? What's the big picture look like? When you get into kinetics and pharmacodynamics, that's where I spent most of my career. That's why I can't get it out of my mouth right now. But PK and PD, how do you get to those first clinical studies? What's required? And I think that, I forget who asked, I think it might have been Robert, where has this drug been before I'm taking it? And if you think about the first clinical study, I remember an FDA person that came to speak to us, and they talked about, gee, the first in human trial for an FDA decision maker. Do I give them the okay to go forward with this or not? Let me see. No one's ever had this in their body before, and I'm going to be held accountable for the very first human being ever, being exposed to this. That's a very weighty decision for them. They don't take it lightly. So that's what, this course teaches you. Well, what do they need to look at if they haven't seen it in people? And then we have a course on just clinical pharmacology. Different things around the regulatory view. The fact that the label, the end game of drug discovery and development is that thing that you unfold and out of your prescription, that's the label, the package insert. That's really, the product. It's not the chemicals, it's not the pill, it's not the liquid. It's what do we know about that and how does it work and how do you use it? We have a course on IRBs and how they oversee clinical trials. And recently we've got the guidances on benefit risk and rare disease. Some of our early members just said, we need to know basic things like how does a scientist think? I'm not a scientist. I'm an interior designer. How does a scientist think? So we built something there. The other thing is you find yourself reading lots of papers and it can be overwhelming. Well, there's ways to efficiently digest papers, and knowing what those papers are and how they're structured and what they do is very helpful. And then people wanted to know just the basic biology, how do things sort of work. So that's our current catalog. And what one of these things looks like. So here's the basic drug discovery and development one. And we've got it, organized into lessons and things so that you can take a look at it. And many of them are video format, so you just kind of walk your way through. And I think this one's like, this lesson is, a little under 4 minutes. And I'd play it, but it's just noise when you do it over a Zoom meeting. So I'm gonna go
How do
back.
we access this? Do we just go to Atlas?
So you go to, yeah, I can put that in the, actually, Heather, could you put that in the chat, please? It's just salemoaks.com/atlas. And it will take you to this opening page.
Thank you.
So let me go back to my slides. So I had some questions as you guys, as the focus group that Brad sold you as. I think you're much more than that. You're a fun group to talk to as well, and hopefully we can give you some answers here. But what's your initial reaction
Well,
just to the idea
before you
and
go
what we've
on,
got?
Kevin, there was
Yeah.
also a question in the chat when I went to post the link.
So the question is, if I can access a phase 2 or phase 3 trial, how should I feel about the difference?
I think that the difference between the two is we always called phase 2 trials the learning trials. And what you're doing in phase 2 is you're trying to find out, does this drug work? Phase 3 are the confirming trials. And you're confirming that what you saw in phase 2 was true. And you're expanding on it and building a larger safety database. All these drugs are targeted to do something. And if it's efficacious, it's doing what you expected it to do. They all have off-target issues. It's just whenever you put anything into your body, food, water included, you can have adverse reactions to it. When you're doing a phase 3 trial, you're trying to get a large enough group that you're casting a net that you're going to pick up some of those rarer adverse events, and that's that's the difference between the two. In phase 2, you're still looking for adverse events, but you're asking the question, does it work? Phase 2, and actually it's for oncology, phase 1 usually answers that question to some extent. I remember when Pfizer didn't always have oncology. Not until about 1997 or 8 did we start to dive into oncology. And when all those oncologists came on, they go, oh, no, we put phase one right into patients, right into patients. They had to, because they were talking about chemotherapies that had known toxic effects. You can't go into somebody who's, quote unquote healthy and give them something like that when they really have no benefit from it. And particularly since many chemotherapies can cause other cancers or other mutations. So phase one in oncology is like phase two in normal drug development. Phase three is really, now they're getting into what can we combine this with, and what can we really know about this product. So
Thank you.
hope that answered the question.
Brad, you still have your hand up. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I have a follow-up question. So I guess since I'm on, I'll say it now. I think for our patients, it's not understanding the process per se as a process. It's understanding how it relates to their decision-making. The decision-making that patients have to make is step one. I can get a standard of care treatment, or I can get a clinical trial. What are the trade-offs in between those two? What are the pluses and minuses of standard of care and clinical trials? And I'll just, so I'll give you my answer to that question. I know that the cancer vaccine that I'm getting now in a clinical trial has the standard of care built into it. So I'm getting a standard of care plus, which gives me like one more shot at possibly getting a good response. The cancer vaccine is working. It's not the other treatments. And so maybe that'll give me a long-term, more durable response. So I'm getting access to an enhanced possibility. On the other side, once you're and another positive is I'm getting tested like crazy. I had 13 vials of blood taken from me today. And I'm getting scans. There was a scan at 6 weeks or something. Normally they don't scan as frequently. They don't take as much blood. So I'm getting there's a lot more monitoring of me, which is more data, which is a good thing. On the other side, I went to my doctor and I said, can I try this? I heard about one of these alternative therapies that would be complementary to a vaccine. Could I try, throw out, intravenous vitamin C? And no, you can't do that because they want to control the boundaries around the clinical trial. So I think a module that I would encourage you to develop would be just the basic, like, I'm faced with a choice between standard of care and clinical trial, and what are the pluses and minuses of each?
Well, thank you for that. That's actually really good, and it's one of the things that I don't think our society does a good job of preparing us all to ask ourselves those questions. That's a high level of critical thinking around your own healthcare, right? And so what's the difference? And you just gave some great examples of the pluses and the minuses of taking a clinical trial over standard of care. One of the things you'll see in oncology is there's a lot of those additive trials. They're always trying to advance a little bit. And the way a company would approach something is they'd do, an add-on to standard of care. Then the next trial would be, let's see if we can do it without the standard of care. Can it become first-line treatment? Can it replace the standard of care? But that's a different sequence of logic you have to go through. You don't just jump to, hey, let's give somebody something we think might work when there's something that already will help them. So there's constant sort of building on each other's shoulders. David, you've had your hand up for quite a while.
So the first thing that occurs to me when looking at your diagrams there is for each of those lessons, I would be looking for examples to be included. And if there are multiple examples, then I'd be interested in compare and contrast. Whereas a few minutes of lecture would not hold my attention nearly as well as if I had something to apply it to.
Thank you. That's really good feedback. I'm a storyteller, so I always try to use examples, but I think it's kind of emphasizes it.
Yeah, so no other questions, so I'll throw one into the hopper. And I kind of alluded to it before, but how is drug discovery changing with the advent of multiomics, right? Which is really all about sort of redefining cancer. Is that part of the equation in terms of selecting or targeting drugs, selecting patients, etc.?
It absolutely is. As I mentioned before, chemotherapies were just kind of a shotgun approach that was used, right? It was just like, oh, well, we're gonna take care of this cancer. Where now things are very specific, and you can see that with something like Ibrance for breast cancer, which is a very specific mutation, or yeah, it's a very specific genetic profile. It won't work in the other things as well, and because it was targeted for this genetic profile. So in drug discovery, where this is really taken off is they're starting to do the genomes of cancers, genomes of solid tumors, and understanding the differences. And then you can do, in vitro work on that, and you can move into, models that are closer related to those specific cancers. In other disease areas, non-cancer, they're doing the same things. They're looking at the genomics. What this is, genomics and proteomics and metabolomics and all the multi-omics. So all the things that you can measure in the body. It's actually one of these places where artificial intelligence will make a huge difference. There's too much data for scientists, living off the backs of NIH grants to just go through and go, oh, there it is. There's the answer. The patterns are too complex and too subtle. And so artificial intelligence is starting to help the discovery world come up with what are the right approaches to these various differences that we see in people, that we might be able to intervene on. So that's one. Finding patients, I think it kind of builds off the back of that. I wouldn't expect, and this is just me being cynical about my own career and history, pharmaceutical companies aren't going to jump into AI in clinical right away. That's something that it's like, wait, we want to let this settle and become a mature technology first, and then they'll start to use it. And by the way, the things that they're working on today have been in progress for years. It's a little late for anything that's in the clinic to like shift. The things that are in the clinic today were actually, probably thought of or envisioned back in 2010, and it's they're quite a ways along. There's also, I know there's a lot of work going on around this. So just talked to some people from the Broad Institute yesterday. They're doing a study called Count Me In, and they're looking for cancer patients to provide genomics data and medical health record data, so that they can start to come up with those patterns. They're targeting several tumors right now. I'm not sure if any of yours are there. There's another study called All of Me, where they're just trying to get 1 million people signed in of all health status, so that they can start to draw the picture, sketch out the picture of kind of the phenotypes that come from the genotypes. What are people's lives like, and what's their health status?
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I would just add, the other thing that I think that patients will want is the ability to evaluate literature at some level. You had mentioned that was on your list of existing modules, but if people want to be able to guide their treatment and be partners in co-pilots with their medical team, they need at some level, be able to quickly skim some literature that describes the results of a clinical trial.
Yeah,
More than-
absolutely.
I was gonna say more than that, be able to evaluate whether any research paper, whether this is a good paper or not, because unfortunately there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, crap out there.
Yeah, there is no better term. It's crap. There's a lot of misinformation that can easily seep in, and I think that the barrier is that when you jump from something that's like advertising or public consumption to the research papers, it's a big shift. There's research papers are by necessity and intentionally rather thick to read. You know, it's you got to go into what were the methods. You've got to go into, you know, how you're analyzing the results. Now, does that mean you have to read all those details? Maybe not. Not at first blush, and that's where I go in my courses. You know, read the introduction, read the conclusions. If you're still interested, go in and dig back to where you can maybe ask questions on whether it's real or not. But all those details can just be overwhelming to a lot of people. And I think we have a literacy problem. We have a scientific literacy problem, and we have a health literacy problem, and those come together here. People aren't paying attention to a lot of this stuff until they're finding themselves needing to.
Well, I'll just give you a quick example we had last week or the week before, which was mushrooms. And there was a Memorial Sloan Kettering site which cited some research studies that show that turkey tail mushrooms are effective and have anti-cancer effects. But then Alan Morris, a pathologist who's in our community, said, well, is it a phase 2 trial or a phase 3 trial? Is it cell lines or is it animal models? You know, where is the source of that information? And that was critical to say, is it in humans? And how many people have, you know, is the information source credible? And how credible is it? And and the other question is, how widespread is that for everybody? Is that for all cancers, or is it for the complementary therapy if you're getting chemotherapy or radiation, you know, whatever? So all of that nuance we bump into all the time.
Yeah, it's too easy for proclamations of, oh, this is helpful. They just don't. They're not asking those tough questions because it's not a simple. Cancer is not a simple disease. There's over 16,000 of them is the last that I've heard. So that's a lot of different diseases that need to be looked at. And anything else I can do for you guys today, or anything anybody wants to leave with me? Words of wisdom?
Well, what I was going to say is we're going to publish this on our YouTube site. We'll also put it on our Circle community forum. So, you know, there could be further engagement and questions that come in through the community collaboration platform. So look for that. And Kevin, thank you so much for your time and for educating us on what you do. It is important I think, for our patients to understand the drug development process and to get educated about it. So appreciate it's complementary to our other topics. And then just before we close, again, just a general reminder that we are a donation-based community, and any donations are much appreciated. You can just go to our public website, cancerpatientlab.org, and hit the donate button, and that will go right to a Zephy form. And we would greatly appreciate it. But thanks, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we